These grayscale exercises have helped me to get to know my gouache paints and have improved my eye for seeing values. It's not as difficult as you might think to tackle complex subjects when color is removed. And doing these can build confidence for handling color later. I'm going to share my approach to doing these, but first let me show you the supplies I used. All of the gouache paint brands I have tried are quite similar to each other. All of them are good. I find the Strathmore Visual Journal to be a great cheaper paper for value practice and color mixing practice. These were my first attempts at making a value scale. The first time, I made the middle value too dark. As a result, the value between white and the mid value is also too dark. That second value is too much of a step from white. My second try was much better. Each step is more distinct. For the next practice exercise, I repeated creating a value scale. Then I made a study from a small isolated section of a painting that has strong value contrasts. I limited myself to this small section so it would be less overwhelming, and I tried to recreate it as well as I could. Next, I asked myself what could possibly be one of the most difficult paintings I could think of to copy as a novice. Juan de Perea came to mind. I had never painted a portrait before, but again, I tried my best. I got parts of it right, but I know I didn't see the mid values well enough on the face. Even though I knew it wasn't perfect, I was proud of the attempt. I understood I had some growing to do and was excited to move on to another piece. This time, I thought about what many artists say is a very difficult subject to paint: hands. I admire the way Bouguereau painted hands, so I picked an example from him. Again, looking at it after time has passed, I recognize some of the middle to dark values are a little off. But with each of these, I was improving various fundamentals of painting with gouache. That doesn't mean it comes easy, it just means that I can push myself and I can keep getting better. To practice making a value scale, I taped 5 1-inch squares and I used a 1/2 inch flat brush, as it would make painting the squares faster than if I used a small brush. Before I did this exercise, I needed a very clean brush, so I made sure there was no paint of any shade or color from a previous paint session on my brush. I decided to use some gouache paint that had begun drying in the tubes because it had been a while since I used these. Sometimes doing value exercises or color mixing exercises makes you anxious because you feel like you are wasting paint. But the truth is, the knowledge you get from doing these will actually help you to save paint in the future. This white paint was quite dry, so I added a couple of drops of water to soften it. I had to work more water into it later to get the paint to move. The black paint was very dry in the tube, so I dropped some water into the tube to get it to dissolve. I don't recommend this because it was quite messy. After painting the white square, I again needed to clean my brush completely before painting the pure black square. Water pulls the paint all the way up the bristles into the ferrule, getting trapped deep inside. Using a paper towel helps to pull that paint out, but it takes repeated washes to get all the paint out. Dipping the brush into a clean container of water can show how much paint is still trapped in there. When I painted the darkest square, I wanted to make sure there were no streaks of white paint leaving the brush. As I got ready to mix a mid-value, I wanted some of the black paint out of the brush, but not all of it. Keep an eye on this black square while I mix the mid-value. See how it becomes lighter as it dries. One of the great things about gouache is that you can adjust values easily. So even if you hesitate or feel anxious about getting it right, you can always paint over, layer, and blend. I noticed a little bit of streaking. That was happening because there was some black paint pulled with water into the ferrule and it wasn't mixed well with the white paint. You can clearly see this now as I touched the brush on the paper towel. The black had more water in it and was suspended near the ferrule. I had two choices. I could wash the brush out more or force the paint to blend more on the palette. While I was washing the brush out, I could also watch the value change as the paint dried, so I could adjust the mix to adjust the value if needed. Next, I could paint a value between white and the mid-value, just like the step exactly between white and black. Streaking was happening again. This time it was because this layer was blending with the paint underneath. If the paint moved well, as in it had enough water in the paint, I could smooth the streaking out by brushing over and blending it lightly. I have a tendency to make the middle light value thin and watery because it looks right on the palette. But if the paint is not thick enough, you can see the paper underneath the layer of paint. So I was trying to get a thicker and smoother application of paint. It's fascinating the way the value changes when you paint with gouache. Having done this a few times, I understood that this middle light value would darken as it dried, unlike that black square that lightened as it dried. I was questioning if it was too light, closer to the white value than to the middle value, but decided to wait and adjust it later if I needed to. For the middle dark value, I noticed I painted it too light. It was closer to the mid value and too far from the darkest value, so I darkened it a bit. It still seemed off. The light middle value did not quite look right to me, but if I darkened it, it would be too far from the lightest value, and if I lightened it, it would be too far from the darker value next to it. So I guessed it was somewhat correct between the two. I also challenged myself to paint a 9-step value scale. It felt a bit intimidating, but the process was the same. Before I move on to a little sped up demo of how I've been approaching these value studies, I wanted to show a couple more that I had fun painting. I have been experimenting with a certain workflow that I know is not the most efficient, and I know it will change over time, but I'm enjoying learning and exploring. I wanted to use the same paint that I used for the value scale. Then I remembered I had the same black that I previously cut out of another dried up tube and placed in a little jar. I had been waiting for an opportunity to use it, and a practice exercise is a good time for it. I also wanted to show that you can use any kind of paint to do this, even if it's dried gouache. Just do the work and practice over and over, and don't let your supplies hold you back. I'm using another small segment from the waltz painting for this study. For this one, my method of working was to start with the darkest value I could see and place it everywhere I could see it. Then I worked through laying down the other steps in value. I work slowly and I tend to jump around a lot, just doing whatever comes naturally. It may not be a method that works for everyone, but for now, this is what I have been comfortable with. Gouache paint makes hard edges everywhere, unless you paint with lots of water. I've been enjoying painting opaquely with not too much water, and then blending the harder edges together. Then re-establishing some texture and strategically placing hard edges with dry brushing. If I feel like a brush is not working the way I'd like, I try something else, whatever it takes to get as close to the result as I want. I'm switching to Daniel Smith gouache now for the last little value study. This time, I started with a middle value, instead of the darkest value I could see, mostly because I wanted to cover the background area first. But again, I just tend to dance around everywhere and fill in pieces that help me to build everything up before I get to my blending stage. Then lastly, adding back some details, texture, and adjusting some values here and there. I wanted to also test myself with this approach with watercolor as well. I have only ever minimally played with watercolor, as in random brushstrokes and swatches, so I began trying some value scales. I didn't have any black, so I went with the darkest value I had, which was Payne's Gray. As you can see, I struggled a lot, but I kept trying. Once I felt like I was getting the hang of it, I tried the fragment of the waltz painting again. I was thrilled again. It wasn't perfect, but it was my first try painting something with watercolor. Here is the side-by-side with gouache and watercolor. I pushed myself to attempt another extremely difficult and unfamiliar subject to me, a study of a portrait by John Singer Sargent. It was indeed a great challenge. I would have loved to grab my gouache paints and fix areas that I was struggling with, but I persevered and stayed with watercolor only. I've noticed a pattern that is appearing from gouache to watercolor. Some of my darker middle values are missing or not strong enough. And for some reason, the camera also does not pick up some of those lighter mid values well. But at least I've identified something I need to improve on, and I'm excited to practice painting more. Thanks for watching.